welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host today, Jen, and today I am happy to be joined by not only an author, but a librarian. It's so nice when I get to talk to a fellow librarian as well as an author of a book and other short stories. We are here to discuss a collection today that's absolutely lovely. So welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Sure. Kathy Anderson. I live in Philly with my wife, and this is my third book. One interesting fact about myself as an author, all three of my books were published after the age of 60 with traditional small presses. Previous to that, I was making a living as a public librarian and publishing short stories in literary journals and so on. So I was growing and learning over the years, but my first book didn't come out till I was 60.
I always love to hear. I think it's very common for librarians to have many career phases, like happening into libraries was sort of like a second career for me. And I love these journeys because every single thing that you bring to your next position is what's going to make your, perspective unique and all that, which is great for writers. So I would love to hear more about how your time as a public librarian, you think influenced, how did it shape you as a writer? Maybe either your process or your writing concerns?
I always start out this subject by saying when anybody asks me about, my writing path and decisions I've made, I really urge people to check out being a librarian as a wonderful way to make a living as a writer, because it is very full of human beings and their stories, especially working in a public library, which was my love. And so I only worked in public libraries. I think that I came to work directly out of college, then graduate school, then went right to the public library. And we all are limited by our life experiences. So I had the experiences that I had up to that point. Then I get to a public library where every kind of person wanders in the door. All kinds of people are talking to you about what they need and want and what their story is. So basically, working in a public library just totally expanded my view of what people's lives were all about.
That's so interesting because I have spent some time thinking about that. Lots and lots of people watching opportunities. You get paid to read, which is great for writers too. And another thing I was thinking about was that in this job, like you get to talk to a lot of people and make connections and see how they grow over time. But there's also like a part of librarianship where, I feel like that's almost like being a taxi driver or a bartender, where sometimes you are invisible to people. And so you see interesting things that maybe like you wouldn't see, like if they didn't forget there was like another person at a desk there.
Absolutely. And I've had that same feeling many times where, it's just this wonderful observation point in life. And you often can help people and have direct interactions, but many, many times you have so many regulars. I think that's one thing people that don't work in public libraries don't get. And I have written that into a few stories, just how well you get to know people by seeing them day after day and seeing what they are reading, what they're interested in. It's almost like they become as if you were in a neighborhood of tight neighbors. I live in a row house, for example, and I might not know everyone's name, but you certainly just in living such close quarters, you pick up a lot about people's lives.
Absolutely. So, when the opportunity for this collection came around, did you know what I guess the theme of the collection would be? Was it totally driven by, your general interests as a writer, or did you look back at your work and sort of just find a theme emerging there? How did this collection begin?
The second thing that you said was pretty on target there. I had been writing my first book, short story collection, came out in 2016. So after that, for the following 10 years, I was still writing short stories. Many of them were published. They weren't on any particular group theme, all over the place. And so when I came to feel like that I had enough stories that were book worthy, when I looked at those stories, I saw clearly there was a theme of older women, and in particular, older lesbians, which is somewhat, I feel, somewhat of a hidden demographic in fiction and in entertainment. We have much more representation of queer life overall these days, but when you really stop and think about it, it's almost as if the older lesbians get to about 30 and kind of just quietly step way into the background. So, I mean, that thought intrigued me to show, to pull out some of the stories that I felt like highlighted that and showed those lives in a different way.
That's interesting. Something I have thought about is that a lot of queer media often does skew kind of young, I think,
Mhm.
because like coming of age is so important in a lot of those stories. But we do go through a second coming of age in our lives. And that really seems to be like a theme here too, that sort of I don't want to say a second puberty really, but like a sort of a new chance to discover who you are and how you exist in the world.
Yes, definitely. And one of the examples of working with this material that became important to me, the opening story is about a lifelong friendship between two lesbian librarians that met in 1989, but it's a totally platonic friendship. And that friendship lasted and was more important to the two characters than all of their relationships that came and went in those years and decades. So I thought that's a subject, again, I have not seen much about. So in other words, sometimes queer lives are portrayed only in relationship to their sexuality, their sexual identity, their sexual relationships. But as a person I'm interested in writing about full people, and full people. One of the most intriguing thoughts was lifelong friendships, because I have had the beauty in my life of having lifelong friendships.
I do like to see them represented on the page. They are often, I think, not privileged as being as important as romantic relationships. And the pain of a platonic relationship ending can be so much worse than a than a romantic ending because that's expected and it's talked about and it's like a source of 75% of literature is about heartbreak. But you don't
True,
see that about friends. Yeah.
very true.
So, as we've been saying, these stories are very queer-centered about older women, and often very Philly-centered as well. So, can you talk about depicting the city in which you've lived on the page throughout, through different people's stories?
Well, that kind of snuck up on me, to tell you the truth. I didn't have it in my mind when I was writing these stories necessarily, but, as a short story writer, I've been growing as I go and learning as I go, as we all do. And one of the things that I realized is that I really enjoy as a reader, but hadn't been doing a lot of setting a story in a particular city. So a couple of the stories came about when I had these very specific locations come to mind for actions that these characters might do. For an example, one of them is a stilt walker. She's um, giving away her stilts, and the best, most efficient way for her to do that, she decides, is to walk down Broad Street, which in Philly is also called the Avenue of the Arts. And she's going to drop off these professional stilts in a at a school for the performing arts. So, I mean, it just, the details, once I started thinking about place, Philly is my city. I love Philly. And I felt that fun of adding specific locales into the stories. And it seemed to come about just genuinely. So that always means you're on the right track.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah, I like to see different places depicted on the page. And I think it's also interesting to do that in a short story collection because you get to see the city from all different perspectives, from people of different walks of life, with different worldviews, things like that. In terms of the choosing a title story, I always ask writers of short story collections this. How does a story, quote unquote, earn that spot? And why did you choose the one that you did? Did it encapsulate the themes that you wanted to explore? Was it a favorite or a particularly hard won story?
What a fantastic question. No one's asked me this before. And it's so crucial to a short story collection. kind of how you enter it, the opening story is very important because it sets a tone, a mood, and gives an idea. But to me, it's incredibly important the feeling that you end a book with, because otherwise a short story collection could feel like you're just popping around here, popping around there. But it's a book, so it needs to have an arc. It needs to have emotion. And for me, it's important that it ends with like a real thud, like this is an end. So when I wrote that story, Vamoose, I felt that it had that sound to it, that it was an ending story. So it just kind of happened. It certainly was a hard fought story in the sense that it was very hard to write in many ways. And I tried it over the years, different ways. But the other thing that came out of that story was the word vamoose was just a thought, an internal thought of one of the characters. And I put the book together, and then I started that other hard dilemma. What do I call the book? What is a short title that will somehow give the reader a clue that there are 15 wildly different women in this, 15 wildly different stories of women in this? How do you draw that together with one or two words? And as I was kind of just working around the material, looking at everything, literally putting it on the floor and trying to see it with those beginner eyes, that word kind of kept emerging as important because all of the women, no matter what their situation is in the book's stories, and they're all very wildly different things that they're dealing with. There's in each of them, I think there is an element of something ending and something leaving, and then some room for something else to grow. Definite turning points. So that felt like it went with the word vamoose. Other thing that's really important to me is that the word sounded fun and interesting and like different. So I didn't want this to have the feel of a very heavy, heavy emotionally book, because to me, there's a lot of humor in it. And I really wanted to make sure that was the first impression people had. It sounds funny and there's a lot of humor in it.
Yeah, oh, it's a great title and it is a great word. I also love that it's active too, and I think for a book that deals so directly with loss, yet does still have this like very light feeling, that's really important because loss, I think, can be so can render you feeling so powerless, right? And so many of these stories are about finding power or taking back your power in that loss. When I was looking at the website for this book, there was a beautiful quote from Kevin Wilson's blurb where he talks about how loss can create an untethering, can create a feeling of ascendancy. And I was like, oh, that is so beautiful. Yeah, I don't have a question there. I guess that just ended up being a comment, but
Well, whenever I think about loss and this subject, and again, back to the thought of humor, how does humor fit in there? And when you think about how we live our lives, humor is one of the best kind of tools we have as human beings to deal with loss, to deal with the sad parts. And I always think about like everyone always ends up laughing at a funeral at some point. It's like a release, it's a help, it's a wonderful thing we can do for each other as humans. So the loss is real, but the humor is real too.
yeah, absolutely. Is there a story beyond the title story that is your favorite, or is there one that perhaps its process has a particularly interesting story or stayed with you for a while? I think I read online that like you tend to sit with short stories for a very long time. Where's one that like you lived in for a long time and that stayed with you?
The one that comes to mind that absolutely was that. I had a very profound experience in my 20s being in around the foster care system. And so some of the experiences I had, being around that really stayed with me. But yet I didn't have the framework. I didn't have the character. I didn't have a lot of things that you need to make a short story. So I will absolutely say I kept going back to it. I kept it in my mind. I never forgot about it. About 30 years later, I was in a Kundalini yoga class. And that's a very kind of chanting yoga as opposed to a lot of only positions and things. So there's a lot of, it's very, you know, contemplative and calming and soothing. And one of those things where something rose up out of my subconscious and said, you need to set that story in a yoga class. So in other words, this character and all of the things she's going through could be, you could handle it as a reader if it's set up as before class starts, this is what she's thinking. During class, the first 5 minutes, and those are the headings of the story. Class begins, you know, and so I think it was a way to kind of emotionally manage it for the reader and for me. So that was a fascinating process to go that route.
That is fascinating. And I think it speaks to certainly how when I used to, practice yoga in studios, how I kind of used it, that it's like finding this kind of space in the body, but also like giving yourself the mental space and the emotional space to kind of like slow down and and process,
Yeah.
your life and your week, your month, your year. Yeah, it was really interesting to see the story sort of mirror the function of a yoga class.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. So what is next for you? Do you have more short story collections in you, or are you working on anything else? What's on your horizon?
Well, I don't know exactly. I have some short stories coming out within the near future with literary magazines. Um, I'm a big, a believer in the jinx. So I don't talk too much about anything other than what is absolutely positively happening. But I always do have, probably 4 or 5 viable things that I'm working on. And we'll see what comes to fruition. You really, I feel like there's not a 100% control you have over that, as opposed, as people kind of maybe think you just set your goal, I'm going to write such and such, and then you write that. That's not how it works for me. I keep writing consistently, regularly, and I kind of wait and see what builds up energy and what gets to the finish line. That's how I would put it.
Very nice. Well, happy writing.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time to talk to me and our listeners. Very excited to share this book. So.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. And thank you, listeners, for joining us. Please check out VAMOOSE. It's an absolutely gorgeous collection of short stories and very funny, as we've been saying. I think it's a really great read, one that you can read in one sitting or dip in and out of with a story here and there. Works both ways very well. All right, it is time to close this chapter. We'll see you all next time.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.